There is no countdown. You are muted. You are muted. There you go.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us on episode 111 of Blowback, Exposing Imperial Decline. I am just trying to get my Facebook stream going. I think I just did. So, thanks for joining us, viewers. Ian Kummer, my regular co-host from a suburb in Moscow, is here. Our special guest today is Max Parry, returning from Baltimore. We were expecting maybe Ben and maybe another guest, but it will just be the three of us this morning, which is fine. There's a lot to discuss. The title of today's episode is Media-Stoked Political Violence. Of course, that's a reference to the second Trump attempted assassination that took place a couple days ago. Very interesting, facts related to that attempted assassination. And it does suggest that, this over-the-top, wall-to-wall corporate denunciation of Trump as a traitor and a threat to our freedoms and democracy has really contributed to some of these people, engaging in attempted violence and violence, really. I think there's a strong connection, and I think, the media, of course, refuses to acknowledge their own culpability in this phenomenon, but I think they're largely to blame. And so that's my opinion, and let's see what if you guys are in agreement with that, or if you want to push back a little bit.
Well, imagine that, you had Hitler. Hitler was alive today, and we said, hey, Hitler is going to run in the election. What motivation is there for people to, count those votes fairly, or even people on his security detail to take it seriously? Imagine. That's the level of hysteria that we've had. So that he's like Hitler, or actually worse than Hitler, because I guess maybe Hitler would have been okay with immigration or something. I don't know. It's like
there was the guy on MSNBC that actually said that. He said that it was a huge gaffe. I remember he said Hitler didn't engage in. He was calling Putin worse than Hitler. But
yes,
but at the same time, there was this Kamala Harris ad. Actually, I don't know if you saw. Medea Benjamin on X was sharing it. It was this new Kamala ad where, she's referencing, the ad references Ronald Reagan, and that said, presidents throughout history have stood up to communist dictators. And there's pictures of Stalin in it. And it talks about, it's basically just attacking Trump from the right, saying that he coddles dictators, and actually implying that Putin is a communist, quote, communist dictator. This is like just the most unhinged propaganda I've ever seen. And the shift, where liberals are just basically like right-wing loons during the Cold War. I remember when Obama and Romney were running against each other in the debate between them. Obama was attacking Romney because Romney cited the number one national security threat to the United States was Russia. And this is like 2011. Obama
2008
attacking Romney for having an old Cold War mentality. Mm-hmm. And now, just a few years later, the Democratic Party has adopted all of Romney's viewpoints. So it's really this neoconservative shift, this transformation of the Democratic Party is incredibly disturbing. And so, when you have a spectacle like that debate where Trump calls Kamala a Marxist, which is obviously insane, and then there's this tit for tat where Kamala puts out this ad saying that he supports communist dictators, because obviously she can't call him a communist, but she can, red bait him this other way through, talking about the fact that he's diplomatic with Kim Jong-un and at least embraces rapprochement, at least in terms of rhetoric with Russia. And I mean, it's just insane. The political discourse, the quality, which it's degraded is just, it's surreal. It's surreal.
Well, I mean, it's funny because it's what you're talking about is a rehabilitation of these conservative and right-wing figures. Because I remember when Reagan was literally worse than Hitler, and of course Bush was literally worse than Hitler. Mitt Romney was literally worse than Hitler, and then it's just like, well, actually, we should be against Trump because, Reagan era officials, Bush era officials, Liz Cheney, McCain's family, all signed up. That's an actual talking point for the Harris campaign. More than 200 Republicans have, endorsed her. And it's like you're trying to make me like Trump more. It's like it's like the best sales pitch for Trump is that Reagan and Bush era against him. It's just what a clown world. What a clown world.
It's surreal.
I wouldn't say that. I think there's a different, it's a different level of rhetoric, of anti-Trump rhetoric that didn't really exist previous. Like, so you're kind of, because it kind of sounds like you're suggesting that, everybody has been compared to Hitler and there's nothing new here. But I think there is something new with the anti-Trump rhetoric, and it's on a different level. And they definitely didn't deal with, Reagan, Bush, or Romney the same way. They were all accepted. They were all acceptable members of the ruling establishment, and there wasn't this bipartisan consensus that was out to destroy them. But
the real problem with Trump is not his even really his policies. It's the way that he attacks institutions, the fact that he's such a loose cannon, the way, yes, some of it is policy in terms of like the isolationism and the stuff about trade and the economic protectionism. But a lot of it, I really think, has to do with style and presentation, and that Trump is an outsider, in regard to that elite. I mean, even stuff like, people always cite that, have you guys ever seen that video when, I believe it was at the White House Correspondents' Dinner when Obama was president and Trump was in attendance, and this was around the time of the whole birther controversy that Trump was.
And Obama was making fun of Trump. It was like a villain origin story.
Exactly. And I always had, obviously that's part of it, but to me, that people's interpretation of that video was very kind of incomplete, because to me, like, it was, it's one of the most humiliating things I've ever seen. And to me, what it was one member of the ruling class saying to another, you are not good enough to be one of us. Like, you are embarrassing to us. Like that, because the part of the, Trump is, this nouveau riche, he's not really as embedded he represents a certain wing of the ruling class that which is really a part of what I think a lot of this inter-elite infighting is all about. Trump represents a certain wing that's, it's not the old money and the the national security establishment. It's this other wing. And to me, that video, it was one member of the ruling elite, really castigating another in front of the world. And I don't know. That's one of the most humiliating things I've ever seen. He just absolutely destroys him, and you can just see the humiliation. And
I don't, I don't recall exactly what you're referring to. I'll have to check it out. But it does kind of remind me of the recent debate where Harris is just saying, you're pathetic, you're despicable. She kind of unloaded on him with both barrels. And I mean, I don't think it was that impactful, but she definitely tried to, belittle him and expose him and talk down to him and just kind of say what a lot of people believe about Trump, and because, this TDS and this anti-Trumpism is really, given people a very low opinion. And she kind of tried to articulate that I'm
even talking about like on the superficial level, like, when you hear liberals talking about Trump, like, the coastal elites, talking about him and the fact that he's this wealthy guy, but he has no taste in art. He has, he's vulgar, he's crude, he walks in front of the queen when, it breaks etiquette. He eats his steak with ketchup, all this stuff about how he is, he's an embarrassment to the ruling class. But to me, when I hear that stuff, they're not talking about him. They're talking about, ordinary America. They're talking about it's a very classist implications, and the way that they see him as this, affront to, big institutions and the fact that he's this. I don't know. There's just something about the Trump phenomenon in that regard that I find fascinating. That it's really brought out, these sort of divisions within, like what liberals expect, or people that have, it's the fact that Trump attacks, like something like the intelligence community for its assessments of the elections, and attacks the FBI. He is willing to sacrifice those things for his own political gain.
And that gets into the territory that I think is the most impactful reason, the most influential reason why he's not appreciated, because he's really he did it more when he ran the first time and the second time, but his anti-establishment rhetoric, right? And his, I'm going to drain the swamp, they're all crooked. And he really hit that home. And the problem was that really touches a nerve with people. Well, I mean, a good nerve, right? Because the vast majority of Republican voters and Americans are really sick to death of the bipartisan establishment. And they realize that there's not a lot of difference between Democrats and Republicans, that it's a game, that they don't have representation. And Trump really hit that home. I mean, especially when he ran the first time, and he's on the debate stage with 12 other Republicans, and he's just winning and he's knocking it out of the park. And he's pointing out that, everything they're saying is bullshit. And it was just so refreshing, and it was so inspiring to, Republican voters that this guy is saying what I'm thinking. And he really just hit this anti-establishmentarianism home. And
he said stuff that Democrats weren't even willing to say about George W. Bush, when he said he was going after Jeb Bush and saying, not only were there no weapons of mass destruction, he said, and they knew there were none, but they did it anyway. I mean, that was like,
how about the American press is the enemy of the American people?
Yeah.
Like he straight up said that. That's a quote. And those kinds of things, get him. And like you said, because he's willing to trash these institutions, trash these, long-standing bipartisan policies for his own benefit, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's in that way, he's a loose cannon. They can't control him, and they don't trust him, and they don't want him around. But for the voters,
use him to legitimate themselves, which is why I'm very on the fence about how this election is going to play out. I don't know if I can't really tell. Do they want him to be president again? Because it helps, it's something, especially from the Democrats' perspective. That's what they need him to be able to run on something, because otherwise they'd have to do some kind of reform, internal reform, because
Yeah.
They have significant upheaval within their own party about a lot of the policy. You know, they've made repeated pledges to and campaign promises for all these different policies that especially the next generation of voters really wants. And the only way they're able to maintain their legitimacy is by having this bogeyman. So, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Part of me thinks that the parts of the establishment are so afraid of having him as president again that, you know, they could accelerate the decline of American hegemony or Israel's standing in the world. I don't know. There's just I'm very on the fence. I can't really tell. I have no idea how this election is going to go.
Me and Ian are sure that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say about the personal text. You know, it's kind of interesting to see where it started because, you know, the personal attacks alone aren't new because, you know, that's whenever there's a new presidential candidate, everybody's on the other side scrutinizes his history. Like when Kerry ran, you know, people dug up all of his details and they saw that, he kind of exaggerated his military record and was kind of playing both sides. Like there's that famous where he went to the anti-war protest and threw away his medals, but he hadn't actually, he pretended like he had a different set of medals that he threw away, and which is very on brand for Kerry, playing both sides. I'm a big anti-war hero when it's convenient. Then he's a war hero when it becomes convenient, when the political atmosphere is different. Or with Edwards, his running mate, you know, they found out he'd been kind of cheating on his wife when she had cancer. You know, stuff like that, personal stuff like that is not new. But I would say what was different with Trump is that it really rolled off his back. Like the whole locker room talk video. That was the October surprise. That was supposed to finish him. Like I remember even like all the people I knew were like, oh yeah, this will finish him. And, you know, on one hand, I thought at the time, you know, and this was during the whole don't ask, don't tell thing. And at the same time, I thought it was overblown because, you know, they were trying to make it sound like he was a rapist. It's like, it was very crude and inappropriate what he said. But I understood what he was saying. It's like, yeah, if you're rich, you know, you can find women.
Well, he also said, and they let you do it.
Yes. Yeah. It wasn't rape. It was just like, you know, if you're a rich guy, women will throw themselves at you. It's a very crude thing. It's not appropriate to say, especially because I think I'm pretty sure he was married at the time he said to that. But, you know, they overblow it. It was supposed to finish him. When they find some personal dirt on you, you're supposed to just roll over and apologize. That's what every major, left or right, that's what every major celebrity does. Even if you're a very left-wing, very Democrat guy, and they find you did something inappropriate 20 years ago, you're really supposed to just roll over and apologize.
His response was to bring all a huge chunk of the women that had accused Hillary Clinton's husband of sexual assault to the debate where he was, you know, expressing at least in terms of appearance remorse for the hot mic, you know, Access Hollywood locker room.
The media was apoplectic because the normal rules didn't apply to Trump, and so they didn't know how to destroy him, subvert him, and get him out of there.
Yeah, because he just doesn't care. I mean, it's just you can't shame someone who has no shame. So that stuff just did not work on Trump because, yes, let's be honest, he's a kind of a crude guy. He doesn't care. Like, oh, I have this smoking gun evidence that Trump is crude. And it's like, well, okay, we already knew that. Trump doesn't care. His supporters don't care, like, because that's not the reason those
same
people.
Same thing with the Stormy Daniels thing. It's like, all this stuff. It's like when you see them talking about, you know, like this obsession with his taxes. Like, oh, he's not as rich as he says he is. It's like, don't you get that you are helping him by doing that? You're making him appear like a regular person. You're humanizing him. His supporters are going to go, oh, he's like me. He has financial problems. He's this rich guy that doesn't know how to handle his money properly. He's constantly going bankrupt. They're humanizing him. All these attacks on his character, all they do is just solidify his persona, you know, and people are just completely clueless about the Trump phenomenon. I mean, every time I see, it's like, oh, here's the thing, the walls are closing in. We've got him now. Here's this, document that proves he's not as rich as he says he is, or, like as if sleeping with a porn star is going to somehow like put a dent in his image. It's like not even everyone on the planet. I mean, I've seen videos of him denying it, but every single one of his supporters knows that he slept with her, had an affair with her. They don't care. Like anyone that's going to vote for him doesn't care. It's just the whole thing is just ridiculous. Like people think that that's actually going to affect the public perception of him. I mean, the liberal class is totally clueless.
With the taxes thing, I mean, this stuff to any normal person who doesn't suffer from Trump's derangement syndrome, it's very obvious the taxes thing was a partisan attack because basically his property was appraised at a certain value, and that was the value he paid taxes on. But then they basically retroactively said, well, we disagree. We think it was worth more, so therefore he cheated on his taxes, which is so blatantly partisan. And frankly, you could do to anybody who owns property. I mean, I could go to Billy Bob's house and say, well, I disagree with how this house is appraised. I think it was worth $50,000 more than you said it was, therefore you cheated on it. It's such a bullshit. Transparency bullshit tactic.
He openly admits on the debate stage that they asked him, did you use the tax code to pay as little taxes as possible? He said yes. No. He said, and so do all your donors. So does everybody else on this stage. That's why the ruling class doesn't like him, is because he says out in the open what they do. Or at least part of it. That's part of it.
Well, I guess my main point is that the personal tax by themselves wouldn't be new. I think what's new is actually painting one mainstream candidate, one of the two mainstream candidates, as a literal enemy of democracy. He is an enemy of democracy. Anyone who supports him is an enemy of democracy. It's just with this broad brush.
And citing the endorsement of Dick Cheney, who actually stole one, if not two, elections. I mean, it's just insane. In the name of saving democracy, you're citing, all these officials from the Bush administration. Alberto Gonzalez, all these ghouls, these neocon arch conservatives from the most evil administration in my lifetime. That's who you're citing, who clearly, stole multiple elections. I mean, you're going to cite that as we need to save democracy. It's just insane to me.
So me and Ian are pretty sure that, Trump will not win the election regardless of how people vote. Because we don't have a lot of faith in the vote counting process, especially in certain swing states. And we think that it's quite possible that, they're able to control the outcome of an election, regardless of the vote. Now, we might be wrong. And, there's a chance, if Trump wins, then we'll have to rethink that. But it seems pretty clear and obvious that they really, the consensus is they really don't want him in. Kamala is their person, and that they have the means, motive, and opportunity to make sure that it's Kamala that gets in. Now, that could mean, a Trump assassination that'll save them the trouble of, rigging certain swing states. Not that they would ever do that, YouTube. It's a joke. I'm just making a joke. But I'm not making. I don't know. It's tough. I'm trying to mess with the algorithm so they won't tear us.
Well, they don't necessarily have to. I mean, in the last election. I mean, the FBI, meddled in that election by getting. I mean, there was the October surprise with the Hunter Biden laptop story, which the Biden campaign didn't even deny that the emails and the laptop were authentic. But the feds went around to social media platforms and directed them to to censor a story by one of the oldest newspapers in the United States and put out that it was Russian disinformation, even though now a couple years on, they've acknowledged that it was all authentic, but now it doesn't matter because Biden isn't running for re-election anymore.
You're making an assumption, though, that was enough. Of course, that is part of rigging an election, and that is, a way in which the election is rigged. But I'm just saying that at the ultimate level, I'm not convinced that they can't rig it at the counting ballot level as well. And I'm not sure they didn't in 2020. I'm not sure they didn't. They might not have. All the other riggings may have been enough to ensure a Biden victory, with the vote count. But again, with all the mail-in ballots, I'm just not certain.
Yeah, I mean, I have questions about it too. I mean, the numbers I found to be so astronomically high for both candidates, not just Biden, but the amount of numbers of people that they said voted, especially when you look at the previous election, the jump is so high. I mean, I know they said it was extreme circumstances because of COVID and all that, but I mean, the numbers are very fishy. I admit that, but I just mean, I wrote a couple articles about that election, and I never saw any smoking gun evidence that the vote itself was tampered with, and how are they even going to produce something like that? But especially when the people doing the investigating are clearly biased in favor of one camp. But to me, it's not even, you don't even have to go there because they already interfered in the election through, the social media purging and the
of course,
censorship.
Of course.
Yeah.
And again, the lawfare, all these cases against Trump, these legal cases against Trump. I mean, that's more election tampering. The gag order he had, not being able to talk about certain things during, I mean, that's a sort of tampering. And then you have the normal tampering where you have gerrymandering districts and regions, and in blue states you do that to make sure that, and then in red states you do the opposite. But there's a million ways that the election is a farce, and the most obvious way is that you just need the backing of the billionaire class to be viable. And so, right there, that just proves that, our democracy is really an oligarchy, because if nobody that the billionaire class doesn't want in power, if you have to get the backing of the billionaire class to be in power, you don't really have a democracy. I mean, that's number one. But so
I'm surprised. I remember in 2020, they were, because they had the Transition Integrity Project, right, where they were doing these tabletop role-playing exercises. It was a consortium of, people from the Democratic Party elite, like Donna Brazile, and then they had these neocons like David Frum and Max Boot and these other people getting together and role-playing this contested election scenario. But I remember there was also talk that, and from the standpoint of the Democratic Party as a strategy, it seemed like a smart idea to me. I mean, because obviously the attempts to, a lot of people want to abolish the Electoral College, but if they're going to keep the Electoral College, the way to ensure Democratic victory every time would be to, accede or have Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. become states, give them statehood. And that would really, I think, already the popular vote, the Democratic Party seems to get it every time, but I don't think that they've won. Supposedly Bush won the popular vote in 2004, but there's a lot of questions about that election too. But it's really, they haven't won the popular vote since like the early 90s. The Democrat or the Republican Party is in a really grim situation in that regard. So if the Democrats really want to slam dunk it, they, if they were to be able to give statehood to DC, Puerto Rico, or maybe even some of these other U.S. territories, Virgin Islands, or
But
Well,
I mean,
they don't
they want
need
that.
to. I mean, I don't think they need to. I mean, yes, they could. I don't think there's enough backing, even within Puerto Rico itself, to add it as a state. But I mean, the thing is, if you with the current immigration trends, and you notice, I mean, you look at how the media reacts to immigration, right? When they go to a red state, it's great. You know, they're just other Americans. We need to welcome with open arms. But when they pack them up and ship them, like to Martha's Vineyards, then they're up in arms about it. You know, it's weaponizing the border, it's weaponizing immigration. I mean, it's very transparent because if they move migrants, you know, legal or not, to a red state, to a low population density red state, and then first step is to give them deportation protection. And then you give them a path to citizenship, then in 5 years, 10 years top, that is now a blue state. I mean, it's just
Well,
it's a very
Biden deported more immigrants than Trump did.
yeah. I mean, there's well, yes and no. So it's true deportations are higher, but that's because encounters at the border are at record highs. That's also, I mean, it's true deportations are up, but immigration in general is at record highs right now.
Okay.
And you know, I think that's what's missing because we know we can talk about the ethics of border policies. You know, how humanitarian is it? You know, we can talk about how the USA destabilizes the countries these people come from, like the Honduras or Haiti. But I think what's missing is just how partisan a tool it is. Because if you know, it doesn't even need to be. I'm not saying 100% of immigrants vote Democrat. I'm not saying that. It's not true. But you just need a majority. If you know that surefire 2/3 to 3/4 of those people you indiscriminately let in are going to vote for your party. Well, I mean, there's no motivation to not to do that. And there's no motivation to, because I think what's keeping the Republican Party afloat is the Electoral College. I mean, they would have crashed and burned probably 10 years ago or if not longer. But what's keeping them afloat is the fact that it is a federal, not a confederacy, but it's close to a confederacy without calling it a confederacy. You know, there's the states' rights thing that's enshrined in the Constitution. I think that's what keeps it afloat. If it just turned into a popular vote, it would be over already. And the way around that is just to shift those few swing states solid blue. Once they're solid blue, Republicans will never win an election again. You know?
But I would dispute the idea. So you're suggesting that immigration is primarily a response to the motivation by the Democrats to win elections, and I would disagree with that. And I would suggest that I don't think the Democrats or the Republicans are interested in becoming a one-party system where one party just dominates. I think they need two parties. And so I don't think the Democrats really want the Republicans to go away because that's how they legitimize not doing anything, by blaming the other party for blocking it. And if you had a one-party system, then people are going to be expecting things and they won't have an excuse. I think the immigration issue is more for the corporations, and it's doing the bidding of the ownership class to provide cheap labor and also it's divisive, and they can we can talk about immigration. We can divide the working class along these cultural lines, and in the meantime, we're going to have a labor supply of people that are willing to work cheaply, and it's going to lower overall wages. I think the economic thing is more of the reason of the open borders ish. If people don't want to argue,
I don't think the two explanations contradict each other. I don't think there's a contradiction. Yeah. Well, and it's also why Republicans don't oppose it, because that's what even if okay, the party I support is going to become a permanent minority, I, as a businessman, benefit from the cheap or the almost free labor. That's why even those old guard mainstream Republicans don't really, I mean, there's that MAGA minority within the Republicans that are very, very, very loud about immigration. But you can see the Republican Party is split, and that's the reason why it's split, because it's very beneficial to big business to say you can dissolve, because the Republican Party has been in opposition to the labor movement, to unions, because unions are typically, even in very conservative, socially conservative states like in the Midwest, those unions tend to be Democrats. And so dismantling the unions with scab labor is just, I mean, it's a very appealing. I would say it's a compromise. And if the USA did shift to one party having a large majority, and then you had a loud minority party like think of like even in the multi-party systems in Europe, right? There's a one coalition that has a majority and has had the majority for years and years and years, and you have that very loud opposition party. I think that's a workable system, because you can be even in a party where the president is always a Democrat and there's always a Democratic majority.
If the Republicans can't block every Democratic legislation, I don't know what the Democrats would do, right? I mean, they're certainly not going to pass all these things that they pretend to be for. It's like when, they've always said they want a healthcare system. And when Obama had the opportunity, because he had the numbers in Congress, he said, oh, we're not doing that.
Yeah, he had the super majority. Yeah. I mean, they could have codified Roe versus Wade, all these things.
And instead, he went with a Heritage Foundation, healthcare program that benefits, the rich insurance companies and the pharmaceutical corporations. But anyway, so I mean, we can disagree on that. Like, I just don't see that a one party, that's untenable for them. They much prefer to have the opposition strong enough to block the program of the party in power, and it goes both ways.
Well, but we're also thinking, I was going to say, we're thinking in peacetime. I think we're all thinking in peacetime. By peacetime, I mean we're not facing a peer or near peer adversary. Even in the war on terror, it wasn't. I wouldn't even call that, a war footing. It was just, permanent. Attempting some neo-colonial holdings in the Middle East. That's what that was. It wasn't.
So as they gear up
war. For a war
to deal with, these existential threats to the empire, they're going to want a more unified, cohesive. And I can see that, but I see that not as everybody going Democrat, but as just the Democrats and the Republicans not having any differences. But they're still gonna,
I think they have enough, and I think in that you and I have disagreed on that before, because I've always made the argument that the ruling class, that there is factionalism in the ruling class. There are issues they do passionately disagree on. It's not all, I mean, some things, yes, some things are clearly a farce and for theater, but I think there are some ideological differences. And
well, it's complicated. I mean, I would say that individual puppet politicians are bought and paid for specifically because they're true believers in a given thing. And so they're put in power because they truly believe something. But that makes them beneficial to the real owners, who really couldn't care less about these issues, that they see the issues as wedge issues. So they're happy to put their chess pieces around who are true believers. But I was going to respond to Brian. Brian is commenting, and I don't want. So it suggests to me that perhaps we're coming across like we're engaging in the electoral in the election and either supporting the Democrats or Republicans. So I just want to make clear that we are not doing that. I am definitely not going to vote Democrat or Republican. As a resident of California, my vote is literally.
I still have my empty voter registration form right here. I still haven't even bothered to fill it out. So
you can vote for Putin. You can vote for Vladimir.
No, I usually write in Mickey Mouse.
Yeah, that would be a tremendous improvement to either of the the people running in these bourgeois parties. So, but yeah, no, I fully endorse what Brian is saying and what Lennon is saying, because he's really quoting Lennon here. And I don't want to give people the wrong impression just because we're discussing this. It does not mean that we are so. And really, the whole point of this political discussion was I wanted to make the point, media complicity in these assassination attempts against Trump with their over-the-top rhetoric, their anti-Trump rhetoric. And so I'm just pointing that out. So, but where do we want to go from here?
I would have a statement on just to wrap up everything we've been talking about. I think there is a problem is that even faith in the American system has eroded on both sides to an extent. I want to bring up an example is when Kamala and Trump were arguing about Roe versus Wade and abortion rights. What Trump said is, from an American constitutional perspective, absolutely correct. Because they were trying to press him, would you federalize abortion? His point is absolutely correct. It's like, well, one, it wouldn't be politically possible to federalize an abortion law one way or the other. And also it's a state issue. Every state can set their own, like if California wants to enshrine abortion as in the state's constitution, they can do that. If Alabama wants to completely outlaw abortion, they can do that. It's a state system. But what I see specifically with the abortion thing, and even when I argue, because I happen to be in favor of, that's my for what it's worth, that's my personal take on abortion. You need reasonable access to abortion. That's my take. But I tell people on both sides, it's like it is a state issue. And even like both the pro-life and the pro-choice people jump down my throat when I say that to them. They say, no, because abortion is murder, they'll say, well, you literally want women to die in the back alley from coat hanger abortions. Both sides are upset about that. And they want, their belief enshrined on the federal level, which is not how the system was originally supposed to work, because it is a state. That's the whole concept, that there is some degree of sovereignty in the individual states, and and I can't get anybody on either side to even agree with me on that. So that really shows that people don't actually believe in the system itself, and when people stop believing even in the basic principles of how that system is supposed to work, it can't work. So that's my
and I mean, from the Marxist perspective, right? Like the system is not the arbiter of how things work. It's the interests of the ownership class that decides how things work, and they're not going to constrain themselves by any piece of paper, whether it's a constitution or a law that at one point Congress has passed. They're going to just pursue their interests unrestrained, regardless of these things. And so, so I'm not a big believer. I'm not a big champion of the system, the federalist system, and what our founders envisioned. Like, I don't have a lot of faith in their ability to, decide what is justice and what is moral, considering they were mostly slave owners. Anyway, but I know that that's a very, typical American.
You fucking pinko,
belief.
you pinko, Billy Bob.
You commie, right? Well, I mean, I say that not, to be for or against it. That's just the way it is. And so I would suggest that means the political machine, the establishment is going to try something new. Because I think when a system's deteriorated to that extent, there's not even a point in carrying on and even pretending anymore, when there's so little, even at the grassroots level, even at the individual person doesn't believe in that system. That just means it's going to, you could even look at it, the Roman Civil War, the Patriarch Wars, the Patrician Wars, and the Civil War after that, and Caesar crossing the Rubicon and taking power. You could see this as what maybe they're thinking of now. The assassination of Julius Caesar, right? That could be like, okay, this system isn't working. We have this kind of quasi nation state Republican government. And they're kind of like, well, okay, that's what we're going to replace it with something different. So that's my suggestion for what those people are thinking right now. It's time to do something different.
I mean, they have to, right? I mean, things are becoming untenable, so they have to flip the script. They have to come up with something, and I mean, we're seeing that play out to an extent. But I think Trump might be a headache in that regard, and I think it might be important enough to them that they're just not going to allow him to win, regardless of how people vote. And there could be strike three, you're out. You know, this is the second attempt they might be preparing the public to just accept that Trump will be killed, and you know he'll no longer be a problem.
Well, let's bring up Ukraine, for example. So, like, I'll argue with Ukrainians on the internet. I'll argue with Ukraine supporting Western people on the internet. And I'll ask them, doesn't it bother you that Zelensky literally outlawed all of his opposition parties, jailed his opponents, and put himself in power indefinitely, will not have to face? Isn't that kind of the opposite? I mean, this war is supposed to be a war of a Western-style democracy against Russian authoritarianism. Isn't it kind of contradictory to have? And they'll say, no. They'll say because it's a war.
Well, they don't even want to
has...
accept that, Yanukovych was removed in a coup. They don't even want to call that a coup, even though,
at least you could spin that as a democratic uprising against a tyrant. But when the tyrant himself declares martial law and suspends elections, there's no way to spin that as anything but inherently undemocratic. And it's also unusual. I can't think of any within modern history, like 20th century onward. I can't think except Nazi Germany. I think that's the one because Hitler did not face re-elections. That's the only modern democratic nation state I can think of that actually went so far as, Roosevelt didn't do that. Churchill didn't do that. No one else did that.
These are a little bit different in examples. I mean, Churchill didn't have foreign troops, on his territory. Neither did Roosevelt. It might be different. Like, I mean, if Canada and Mexico invaded us in a pincer movement, we might say, hold on, we're going to suspend elections until we deal with this. So Aaron Mate has said the same thing. I mean, he's like, the whole martial law thing, I'm going to kind of give Zelensky a pass on that particular issue due to, it is in the middle of a war where,
even Lincoln didn't suspend elections.
Bashar al-Assad, dictator Bashar al-Assad, they had elections in the middle of civil war with fucking in just as dire a state, if not more so than Ukraine is now. So it's not really an excuse.
That's fair.
But of course, accuse those elections of being rigged.
But here's the problem. The problem is that people, and that was actually the hope with the Confederate movement, that Lincoln would get impeached or just be thrown out because the war would be so unpopular in the northern states. And so it is a triumph of democracy that that Lincoln was reaffirmed by the electorate, and the northern states those free states made the choice to keep prosecuting the war against slavery. But the reason I bring up Ukraine suspending elections is because what is really, if they beat the Russia hysteria enough, what is really stopping them after the election from saying, well, we have smoking gun evidence that Putin is in cahoots with Trump, that, this whole MAGA movement is illegitimate. We are going to make certain changes to the system. We need unity. We need solidarity. We need, a united front against, Russian fascism. What's stopping that? What is at this point, I'm not saying that they're going to do that, but what would be stopping them from doing that at this point? What mainstream person would even disagree with them if they did that?
If they did what?
If they did something extreme, like saying we're going to do, a Red Scare times 10. We're going to round up people. We're going to round up dissidents. We're going to potentially.
When you say they, are you talking about the U.S. government or the Ukrainian?
The U.S. I'm sorry, the U.S. government. What if the U.S. government did something similar to what Ukraine?
No,
did?
Look, whatever they're going to do, they're going to have the full-throated support of the corporate media. So, that's what when they try and shove it down our throats, they're really going to try and shove it down our throats. Everybody's going to be on board. It'll be, the ruling class acting in unison, and there's going to be very little dissent. And so so it just remains to be seen what they determine needs to happen, and how they will push it down our throats. But they're in a tough spot. And is it going to happen before the election or after the election? I mean, things are not clear. I know an invasion of Lebanon by Israel everybody is in agreement it's going to happen within the next few weeks due to the weather. And if it delays more than 5 weeks, maximum, it's not going to happen until spring of 2025. But it's going to be interesting to see, with all these threats to, Western imperialism, I mean, how they're going to respond. And I
that's
think
definitely going to be a factor in the election too. I mean, I think Israel, I mean, apart from the other ways that it already meddles through the lobby, obviously, they can meddle in this election simply by their foreign policy and, whatever, things they choose to do between now and the vote, because that's going to have I think it's going to have a significant sway. I mean, and plus, they're already, classes just resumed on U.S. college campuses, and they're already, introducing new restrictions on what they're allowing as far as protests go. And I think that's going to be, I mean, we have no idea how things can go between now and the next few weeks,
Well, I'm not sure how an Israeli invasion of Lebanon would favor one candidate over the other. I mean, that I don't have a clear thought on that. So I'm not sure, in what ways do you think Israel can influence the election?
Well, because if say that there's, I mean, I just mean in terms of hyping up hysteria around it. I mean, there was a very disturbing, wave of propaganda, obviously, after October 7th, and say, I don't know. I just think that one candidate can attack the other as far as, Trump can, if this kind of hysteria that we saw after 9/11 can be whipped up, with an escalation of that war. It's the same thing that the way that whenever there's a development in the Russia and Ukraine war, Harris attacks Trump as being weak on that. Well, Trump can do the same thing on the Democrats, in regard to Israel, because he's more, openly.
I mean, he's already doing that, and I'm not sure it really sticks because, again, the Democrats are just as having just
they
as much
they can't really do more than they're already doing. Aside,
and I think if there is an invasion of Lebanon, I think the United States is going to help, right? I mean,
of course,
participate. So, but I'm just not sure if Israel did that, which candidate that's going to help. I mean, of course, Trump can say that,
I think it will help Trump because it will it will probably trigger another wave of protests on campuses.
Okay. Against the war, and these people are mostly Democratic siding kind of people.
And have you guys seen these polls about how well Jill Stein is doing in these swing states?
Oh yeah, no, they're scared. They don't like it.
Yeah. They're very, very. There's a lot of trepidation around that because
she could split the votes.
Yeah,
because even Gary Johnson's probably split Clinton's votes more.
And they're really coming after her, like Keith Ellison, these turds.
AOC. Yeah. I mean, there's a reason that AOC has been launching these unprovoked attacks on social media against Jill Stein. She's being told to that. Jill Stein appeared on a very high-profile show, The Breakfast Club. This hip-hop oriented show that is very popular among young voters. And AOC, they enlist her to be the one that goes after Jill Stein because, she's the quote unquote leftist progressive of the Democratic Party, the spokesperson. Yeah. And they're very concerned about these swing battleground states like Michigan, where, the Muslim vote is, 40% for Stein, which for the Green Party, that's unprecedented. So
they're anti-Semitic. Muslims are anti-Semitic.
Yeah, they all hate the Jews. No, I mean, it's that's why they want to vote for Jill Stein. It's just insane to me. I think
I'm not sure. The thing is, I'm not sure how much. I mean, you could be right, and that's a quantifiable way the Palestine issue could hurt Kamala Harris, is if people do protest votes for Jill Stein or sit it out. But the thing is, I'm not sure how much is because the Trump derangement syndrome is so high. Like, I don't think I have seen, because, I follow a lot of these groups and a lot of these threads on Quora and on Facebook, even a little on Twitter, even though I don't personally have a Twitter account. But I don't see this wave of people saying, I was going to vote for Biden or for Harris now, but I'm going to, I don't even see people saying they're going to withhold their vote. I think the vote blue, no matter who syndrome is so strong. I mean, they'll literally pick domestic issues over, a genocide, because I'll see people say, oh, what Israel's doing is wrong, but I don't see them saying, well, you know what, screw.
I'm not sure the Muslims will. And, the polling shows.
Muslims are 1.5% of the USA. That's the issue.
But they are significant in a state like Michigan. There are a few others.
They could push a swing state, so that's why I'm saying it's not.
African Americans. There's been significant opposition to the Gaza policy among African Americans. It's definitely could end up being a significant enough factor. Whether it's enough to override. Yes, what you're saying about, I mean, that's why they're ramping up the, the attacks on Trump in relation to Russia. And Kamala's putting out this ad about, him supporting dictators or whatever. But I think that with a significant development like, say, an Israeli invasion of Lebanon, I do think that could possibly have because the backlash to Israel, and to the Democrats over this policy, I think, say, God forbid, there's something like, another Sabra and Shatila, the Israelis are increasingly unhinged. Who knows? It might not be just like an invasion, they have a history of committing massacres already, but when they're really desperate, when they're really, who knows what they're capable of. So even though they haven't done well militarily in the past in recent history against Hezbollah, and they'll probably do even more poorly in the future. But I just think that the Israelis, these Kahanists are really unhinged. Who knows what? And, now that there's social media that can broadcast live this genocide on air, it could only further increase the bad PR and just become increasingly more toxic for the Democrats in regard to Israel and force them to have to do something. Otherwise, they're going to risk, putting a dent in their election chances, at least as far as the presidency goes. I mean, that's what I also think could happen is people could split their tickets. People could support the Democrats, maybe in terms of, governors and senators and things like that, but, do a protest vote with the presidency. I don't know. There's a number of scenarios that could play out, but
The war cabinet, the Israeli war cabinet met yesterday, and they added an objective to their war aims, and that added objective yesterday was to return the Israeli citizens to northern Gaza. So they've left northern Israel. They've left northern Israel after a barrage of attacks from Hezbollah, and they've evacuated the cities in northern Israel. So one of the objectives now is to return them to northern Israel. And that can't be done, obviously, without a full invasion of Lebanon and pacifying that border. But yeah, I mean, the chances that Israel's going to be successful in that don't seem good. But everybody does agree again that it's going to happen rather quickly, or the weather will prohibit it from happening until at least spring of 2025. So I don't know if that's good timing or bad timing for the Democrats. Max, obviously, is suggesting it's bad timing for the Democrats, and he could absolutely.
I think I'm in agreement with you. It's not going to make a huge difference one way or the other.
I didn't say that. I am uncertain, but
well,
Max
I'm going to say, as someone who is here in the United States right now, I definitely think it's a factor. I definitely think it's a factor. I'm not trying to be poorly anecdotal, but I do think it's
authority trumps your opinion, Ian.
Because
you're not in the United States right now.
Right, that's true. And that's true. I'm actually not in the USA, so it is harder to maybe put put a finger on the pulse of what's going on there. I do, however, think. I mean, do you remember? I don't know if you guys remember this, but a couple shows before the debate, I said it was likely that Trump was going to water down his anti-establishment rhetoric, especially pertaining to foreign policy, and focus more on immigration. And that's more or less what he did in the debate, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
I think
I'm not happy with him about that. Like he thinks that's a winning strategy, and I'm not sure I agree with that. He's trying to play it safe, but I don't know. I think that undermines what his appeal was to MAGA, in the first place, because his anti-establishmentarianism, his anti-imperialism, NATO needs to, the other countries need to pay up into NATO. We shouldn't be doing all that. So I wish he wouldn't tone that down.
I wish he wouldn't either, but that's what he's doing. That's what he's doing.
Yeah, it was very tiresome, the whole debate. I mean, he would shift anytime foreign policy came up, he would shift the debate to being about, the whole situation with the migrants in Ohio and the allegations about, them devouring household pets, and it really got very tiresome.
So ultimately, when you look at the polls of what Republican voters want, foreign policy is, like I said, I'm disappointed. I wasn't expecting much from Trump to begin with, let's be honest. But it is consistent with how voters are polling. When they say, what are the things you personally are upset about? They will list border policy, the economy, to include inflation, and to a lesser extent, polarizing issues like abortion. The foreign policy has unfortunately never really been high on American priorities, because it really doesn't affect. Let's be honest. The wars and the sanctions really don't directly impact Americans' everyday lives. They don't. The war in Ukraine doesn't. The war on Palestine doesn't. So I'm not happy that Trump kind of ditched those issues. I don't think it's necessarily going to save him the election either, because I think it's kind of a done deal. We're going to get Harris, but I can see the logic in doing so. I can see the logic in what his.
I think most Americans do know those things are connected. He's also not trying to just appeal to Republicans. He's trying to appeal to, the very tiny amount of minuscule population that makes up the swing voters.
You're muted.
Yeah. It's hold on one second.
His cat's being really ornery.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that most of the people upset about the inflation know that it's somehow connected to what's going on in terms of, especially Ukraine. So
Yeah.
I mean, I know that. Yeah, polling of Republican voters, really they want him to talk about immigration, and that's why he was doing that. But I think at the end of the day,
Well,
they know those
think
things.
of the Ukraine issue from Trump's point of view. Put yourself in Trump's shoes. So I think to some extent, talking about Ukraine is preaching to the choir. So he did, when they did press him, do you want Ukraine to win? He said, I want people to stop people on both sides from dying, which I think is actually a logical and correct answer. But ultimately, Trump can end the war in Ukraine and his voters, even if he ended it on very unfavorable terms for the Western side. I think not a single person who voted for him would care. But if he talks too much about Ukraine, what it is going to do is potentially upset, like what you said, to that small minority of swing voters, because they're not homogenous in their viewpoints. Yeah. Some of them could be very, very, very pro Ukraine, but still vote for Trump based on other issues. So
the other factor that we haven't mentioned is the amount of people that were supporting RFK Jr. are going to, because that's another group that's not homogenous, where he does, because he obviously is historically a Democrat. He does have many, he's an environmental lawyer. He's got a lot of people that are supporting him that were former Democrats, and he has a lot of Trumpists among his demographics. So that's another factor that we haven't considered. I mean, I don't know how high he was polling in a lot of places, but that is, he did have some level of support that could go either for Harris or for Trump. So that's another factor.
And his endorsement of Trump probably will get a majority of them. Probably most won't go Harris' way, but so I mean, yeah, I mean, if it conceivably, I mean, there's a chance Trump could win, the Electoral College, and whether or not they actually count the votes that way would be interesting to speculate on. But what about the ideological struggle, the ideological warfare, where there's like an unstated effort to get everybody on board with a certain ideology, but it's not overt. And there's like Trump calling Kamala a Marxist, right? And Republicans saying that liberals are the worst. There's kind of an ideological confusion, and then there's also this effort to corral everybody into this ideology. Shoot, that's my work. Let me take that. So talk amongst yourselves. I don't know why they would call me during my program. How do I mute? Okay.
Well, anyways, I think where Billy Bob was going with that, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but we were talking a bit before the show started. So Billy Bob did want to have a segment about Trump is going on the whole, everybody who disagrees with me is a Marxist, like the famous Trump quote, I'm against Marxists, socialists, communists, and Nazis, like they're all interchangeable terms. And then there's also, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but then there's also, I think, some of that going on the other side where Kamala Harris is also against far left guys, but they characterize everybody who disagrees with them as the far right. Everybody is the far right now. Everybody, to the point where the term's almost meaningless. You can't, if everybody is far right, then it's not far right. It's just a mainstream opinion. So I'm sorry, Billy Bob. I was just filling in for you while you were.
Yeah, no, my bad. I shouldn't have even answered that. Shame on me. But what I wanted to, hit at was, you have so liberalism. Liberalism is the ideology that permeates the West, and that is the justification for our empire, right? And our empire is always the interests of empire are always furthered, whether it's a sanctions regime, economic war, overthrowing governments. It's always justified based on liberal ideals and liberal principles. So the Western world is steeped in this liberalism, this liberal ideology. And again, I'm talking about big L liberalism, which isn't like democratic latte sipping, Prius driving, avocado toast eating liberals. I'm talking about liberalism in the philosophical sense, that is ostensible promotion of individual rights, freedoms of religion, freedoms of speech, and things like that. And so this big L liberalism is the ideology of the West. It's the guiding ideology. It's the ideology that's put out there as justification for all the illiberal things that the empire engages in. And so the critics of liberalism that embrace liberalism, like John Mearsheimer, right, like Jeffrey Sachs, who are very scathing in their criticism of empire, of liberalism, and yet they still engage within this liberal paradigm. So they're attacking liberalism, but they're still talking about how it's liberal democracy in the West against these authoritarian governments, these non-liberal governments. And so, and my point is, as a Marxist, it's like what I see happening is these critics of liberalism are endorsing my worldview, right? They're endorsing my worldview, and they're saying that everything that I, as a Marxist, believe to be true is actually true, and yet, out of the other side of their mouth, they talk about how I am so glad I live in a liberal democracy, and they're so authoritarian, and so it's like they criticize on one hand, but then they support and endorse and uphold the bullshit liberal ideology out of the other side of their mouth. And I want to talk more about that. But Ian, I would suspect that you are refusing to embrace an ideological label.
I think that's a correct statement. I don't really want. I mean, there were periods of my life, I told, like I like to tell people on the show, I'm a recovering Bernie bro,
Isn't that just a flavor of? That's just a flavor of liberalism, though.
I mean, I don't even oppose being called. People really don't call me a liberal. Like, I can't even remember the last time someone's accused me of being a liberal. But it's true.
Liberal means individual rights, freedom of trade, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. The government is not going to encroach on your individual freedoms. I mean, that's what
how I would say. And the interesting thing is that I don't think, there are certain, I would say, sometimes I think about myself now, and I compare myself to when I voted for the first time in an American presidential election. That was in 2008. I voted for Obama. I was very proud of myself. I was on the right side of history, because that's what Obama voters were all saying back then. We're on the right side of history. I feel a little ridiculous. I almost wish I could go back in time and take and reverse my vote. Not that would change anything, especially because I was like you, a California voter, would have done nothing, but just out of principle. But I would say I think this is just is because I'm a little bit older. I think I am a little bit more socially conservative on certain issues than I was then, because I'm older, and I think that's kind of a natural progression. But I don't think really my viewpoints are much different in the things that matter when it comes to labor, when it comes to individual freedom, when it comes to economic and social issues. I don't think I'm really different than I was in 2008. It's just, I feel like the rest of the country's gone off in a strange direction. I don't even know what to say about it, because it's just like,
the point that I really want to articulate is that, I mean, I think there is a war. You know, there's an effort, an overt effort to get people in line with a particular ideology, and to you know, disparage and censor alternative ways of understanding reality. And I would argue, like, as a Marxist, that the Marxist way to understand reality makes the most sense, has the most explanatory power, has the most predictive power, and it also has the power to improve things. Whereas liberalism is just a facade for straight up oligarchy and straight up, you know, ownership class dictatorship. I mean, so liberalism is synonymous to me with oligarchy and the rule of the, you know, capitalist class, the ownership class. And it's just a facade, right? Because they don't really, you know, they don't really embrace these liberal values. These liberal values, when push comes to shove, is it the priorities of the oligarchs that matter, or their liberal values? When push comes to shove, it's inevitably the interests of the oligarchy, and they will pursue those, and they will throw their pretend liberal values right under the bus. And so if the operative principle in their behavior, in their policies, is always and everywhere going to choose, you know, their economic and political interests over their ostensible liberal principles, the operative principle then is oligarchy. And it's so that's my point. Like it just is stupid to even engage, to embrace liberalism, to pretend that you want to promote individual rights and freedoms, and then you know, when in reality it's liberalism is a hollow shell to conceal this reality of oligarchy.
Well,
go ahead, Max.
Go ahead, Max.
I mean, just the two individuals you named. I mean, John Mearsheimer has done great work on the Israel lobby and on you know, he's a respected scholar on international relations. He did great work on the Ukraine war, the great lecture. But, you know, he's coming from a certain institutionalized perspective. And, you know, Jeffrey Sachs is the guy a lot of people forget, but he was the economic genocidaire in Russia that, you know, that was at the head of the IMF and imposed a lot of the austerity and, you know, the free market shock therapy that was imposed on Russia. And he's gone through subsequently this, you know, road to Damascus, political transformation. So he's still, you know, he doesn't fully get it.
Right.
So he, you know, I would not even take them seriously. They're such obvious limited hangouts to begin with. And I'm not even sure that they're really a good spokesperson for, I mean, not to defend liberalism. I'm obviously not that myself, but I'm not even sure that they're really, I mean, I don't care what they have to say about, it's like what, you know, when we were talking about someone like Douglas McGregor, you know, when he was airing his views on inner cities and Carla was getting all bent out of shape. It's like, I don't care what his views on inner cities are. He doesn't, you really think I'm going to listen to some fucking jarhead about the problems of inner cities in America?
Thank you.
Shut up and talk about Ukraine. You know, stick to your area of expertise. Nobody cares what you have to say about those issues.
Or Soviet history. We don't really care what he says about.
Yeah, like he doesn't know anything about the, you know.
But this is a problem for me because, you know, he's so popular and other people aren't smart enough not to listen to him, right? So they do listen to him on these other things. And the same thing with Mearsheimer. So when Mearsheimer says, you know, the inevitability of confrontation with China due to his realistic, you know, model of international relations where, you know, it's a competition to be secure. And so the U.S. must, and he supports it, the U.S. must contain China. He is totally in support of the U.S. effort to contain China because that's, you know, that's how he understands things. And, you know, what, but by doing that, he's really just endorsing the Marxist view that says imperialism is an inexorable drive towards political monopoly and global hegemony, and that's not liberal. There's nothing liberal about that. That's
I mean, he
imperialist.
is. I mean, it is inevitable. As long, I mean, from a certain perspective. I mean, not to defend, the pivot to Asia or whatever, but I mean, as long as the U.S. has a capitalist system and it's an empire, it's going to be driven to,
right. But at the other
go
side
after
of his
the
mouth,
resources of other countries,
he's saying
and
that we're a liberal democracy. He wants to call us a liberal democracy instead of a global empire, and he wants to call us a liberal democracy instead of an oligarchy. And so, but then, in his description of how we behave, he acknowledges that we behave. So that's what I'm saying. He talks out.
Yeah,
of both
he's
sides
naive. He's a naive liberal. He's not able to connect the dots between.
That's fair. I'm curious though. You'd think, he would have had interactions with people, and he would have a response to, no, I don't agree with Marxism because of this, and yet, everything he's saying is validating the Marxist worldview. All of his, obvious, perceptions are validating the Marxist worldview, and yet he goes back to, I am so glad I live in a liberal democracy, and we have a liberal democracy, and then he keeps describing us as being very, very illiberal, which is obvious.
Well, you see the same hypocrisy. Yeah. Like, I have a lot of colleagues who are anti-war libertarians, and these people are some of the most passionate anti-war people I've ever met. But they don't understand imperialism for the life of them, because they'll turn around and defend capitalism. They have they oppose war on moral grounds, and that's fine, but they are completely unable to connect the dots economically as to why the United States would, is going around the world with 800 military bases and trying to expropriate the resources of other countries. They think it's because, there's, regulations on, Bretton Woods, or the U.S. switched from the gold standard to, they have absolutely no understanding of, they defend the very system that all the symptoms of, they oppose. And then what do they call it when there are symptoms of capitalism that they don't like? They call it communism. They usually, they attack the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab
those are run-of-the-mill libertarians that you run into on social media, and I don't expect much from them. And I do believe that is the explanation. I just kind of think that Mearsheimer and Sachs, in their travels, ought to have learned something, and I'm just curious about how they can, what is going on in their brains that allows them to embrace the lies of liberalism, while at the same time they are just exposing them, completely and very powerfully, in front of, the audience of ruling class people. So by the way, there was a great podcast that dropped last night, Mearsheimer and Sachs on the same stage talking about their views and disagreeing over China. It was really a tremendous watch. But like Max says, maybe I get too interested and I shouldn't even listen. But I just think they're very powerful critics of U.S. imperialism. And I just struggle with the fact that they don't say it for what it is.
I'm amazed that, especially Jeffrey Sachs' transformation. This is a guy, I don't know what's going on with him internally. I don't know if he feels tremendous guilt about what he knows he contributed to.
Here's Sachs' narrative, what you were implying to him, that he was the one that caused the Russian, because he says, no, I oppose that. I advocated for a tremendous tremendous financial support to Russia, like we gave to Poland. And I was shocked that they didn't provide that same support to Russia that I was advocating for, that they gave to Poland. Poland did relatively well.
He's engaging in hagiography. He was one of the main architects of
I'm open to that truth. I just know he vehemently denies that, and he says it was not him.
Well, he's had some kind of epiphany, but I also think that people often, when they do that, don't want to accept. He hasn't had to really answer for what he did. The average life expectancy of men in Russia went down by 10 years, because of the policies that he helped implement. I'm very happy that he has come around and understands that the NATO expansion is wrong and what the U.S. is doing to Russia is wrong, but he has to me, if I'm really going to trust him and not see him as just a limited hangout, he has to answer for what he did. And it's the same thing with, people like Lawrence Wilkerson, or all these people who have, who are who are on the inside, who, who do a complete 180 and, expose the crimes of empire. They have to at least take personal accountability.
I think a plausible explanation is that they have an ideological confusion, and they never really understood, the Marxist worldview, and they're so immersed in the liberal worldview that they can't figure things out. That's a plausible explanation for their embrace of liberalism, while at the same time they just expose it for the oligarchic imperialism that it is. I mean, it's tough, but and I think that, it's important to discuss that. Go ahead, Ian. Go ahead.
I was going to say, because I feel like some of those points were directed at me and I haven't gotten in a word yet.
From me or Max?
Well, you're asking me about liberalism and what I think of trying to shoehorn people into a certain ideological framework and shunning those who don't accept that label, if I'm understanding your question correctly.
Okay.
So I would just say I think you're partially right, but I think it's affected all sides of the spectrum, because it's true. Because I'll mention my 2008 self again. Because I've always read far left and far right outlets. I always wanted, and there was a time, on the internet when you could go and you could find actual very radically different viewpoints, right? You could go on the left, you go to Salon, you go on the Guardian, you could go on these very left-leaning websites and get non-mainstream views. You could go on the right-wing type websites like Zero Hedge, the Gateway Pundit, wherever that website's called. There's a couple. You get different mainstream views, but what I've noticed, and I'll say I really don't even go on those left-wing websites like the ones I listed anymore. And the reason why is because it's no different than CNN. They're the same, like the Salon and Guardian and all those, the Daily Beast, they all push the same bullshit CNN does. It's like, if there's no difference, there's not even a point in reading 4 different websites if they're all saying the same thing. But I think that's also affected right-wing politics in the USA as well. Like I mentioned earlier, how everybody is labeled far right now. Tucker Carlson's not far right. He's like center right at best. He's like center right in traditional American politics. But if you want that, if you just like, okay, well, if I want that kind of nationalist right-wing perspective on a certain issue, well, it doesn't really exist anymore. So I think, and the reason why I say affects both sides is because it's a system that increasingly favors conformity. They want conformity. Now, that's the most important, and that's why you don't see that divergence of opinion. And the people who do have a divergence of opinion from the establishment get canceled. Even Fox News, like if you paid attention to Fox News, like it was actually surreal, because I was watching, because I was spending a lot of time on YouTube, I kind of fell into this pattern of always watching Tucker Carlson's clips on YouTube. And I remember that week leading up to him getting shit canned, he was going after Zelensky. Like he was hardcore going after Zelensky, calling him a dictator. He was just going after him. And then like he ended his last show, I think it was Friday. Like on his last show, he was talking about how, next week I'll pull up even more dirt onto Zelensky. And then he was fired. He was canned. So, Fox News, they have to make money. So they still peddle themselves as an we're against the commies and the leftists. They'll peddle that same BS. But you'll notice they're not pro-Trump. They don't really, they don't go against Ukraine that much anymore. They really don't.
Yeah.
Because like what you guys were saying earlier, what you guys were going after about Trump, how Trump will just blurt out these things you're not supposed to say. And Fox News, when they had guys like Tucker on there, they would be willing to do that. Now they don't. Now they're more of, I would say they're like a slightly more conservative version of CNN and NBC. You know, they're not really.
Yeah.
I don't look at them anymore.
I'm struggling to understand the relevance. I mean, I agree with that. Like, I mean, Fox News is watered down a lot, and they're by and large pro-establishment, which means anti-Trump. But I mean, again, I would consider all of they're all big L liberals, right? So liberalism, like one understanding of liberalism is that it again, it just prioritizes pretends to prioritize freedoms and personal rights, and making sure that government doesn't encroach on your freedoms, and also free trade, things like that. But what it does do, it specifically ignores or conceals or censors the Marxist, what Marxism points out, is this oppositional class interests, and how these oppositional class interests are the main influencing factor on behavior and policies of the bourgeois government, right? And so when liberalism ignores the reality of oppositional class interests, it automatically just becomes unhelpful. It becomes useless in understanding things or in making things better, and so that's the Marxist criticism of liberalism. Is that primarily they just ignore and deny this reality of oppositional class interests. It's nowhere in their narrative. Their narrative again is all about rights, freedom, but at the same time they're pretending to be about rights and freedom. They're violating everybody's rights around the world. They're impinging on everybody's freedom around the world.
Look at Macron, that election. I mean, he just blatantly ignored the result.
And so what do liberals do with this reality, right? Well, what Sachs does is he just ignores it, and he says, I'm so glad I live in a liberal democracy. And it's true, I'm lucky to live in a liberal democracy, and it's these other countries that are authoritarian, and they buy into that bullshit paradigm, which is what liberalism upholds. The ideology of liberalism upholds this bullshit paradigm of that, hey, we're enlightened and we really do care about individual rights and freedoms.
Well,
again,
I mean, I think everything you said is correct. I just think it applies to the other side as well. And I also think it's not new
What
either.
is the other side? What do you mean the other side?
Well, I would say even the very quote unquote right-wing figures in American politics, going back decades, not recently, are very liberal in comparison to the rest of the world. Because like even American Republicans, I would say from a global perspective, are more liberal when it comes to
well, at the outset, I defined liberal as big L. It is not just Democratic voters. It is not just latte sipping, avocado toast eating, electric car driving liberals. It's the entire Western establishment. It's Western Europe. It's the Democrats. It's Republicans. It's really everybody who thinks in these terms of freedom and individual rights. Right? Because these terms are simply the justification and the support structure for oligarchy and for ownership class dictatorship and imperialism. I mean, that's what it is. And until you start talking about class and the reality that the ownership class, and that's what politics is. That's what left versus right really is. It's the working class versus the ownership class, and it's the struggle for political power that ensues from this natural delineation within society due to capitalism and the privately owned means of production. So the working class, is interested in, putting their political parties in power against the oppositional interests of the ownership class. That's what politics is. That's what left versus right is. And in this country, we've totally lost sight of that. And liberalism has obfuscated that reality. Liberalism ignores this class divide and focuses solely on individual rights, blah, 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 which again, they don't even care about or uphold. So I'm saying that there's a battle over people's perceptions, over people's understanding of ideology, and people need to trash liberalism, understand that liberalism and this whole pretense of we're a liberal democracy and they're authoritarian needs to be thrown out the window, and you need to start looking at things in terms of through the class, class analysis and class perspective, because that's
on that note. I actually have to get going, guys. I would love to continue.
No, you have to say I'm right, and then you can go.
Sorry, I actually have to get going, but it was a pleasure as always, and look forward to doing it again soon.
I'm
sorry for the
I ended at the end, Max, and didn't let you have a word in, but we'll have you back soon. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, of course. Take care, guys. Thank you.
So I'll just respond. I think what you're saying is true, but it's not just class, because what's essentially happening is what they want is everything to be a big blob of gray, and it's not. So it's not. So it is class. Yes, it is class. They dilute the class interests in the USA and in other countries that is controlled by the establishment, but they do it to other things too. So like, I'll bring up an example. So think of, Saint Reagan, supplying weapons to, the Afghan freedom fighters against the big bad commie Soviets. Now in your head, imagine, just like a stereotype, just the most right-wing, racist, xenophobic, nationalist guy you can think of, not any particular person, just a stereotype. What would that hypothetical person say about Reagan, or USA in general, even before Reagan? What would he say about Afghanistan? Well, he would probably say, well, why are we doing that? Why are we supplying weapons to these radical Muslim sodomites, literally? Why are we taking this? Why are we taking this northern these tribes which have a society that's completely repugnant to American
culture, illiberal, illiberal.
Against Russians, because even under communism, Russians were more similar in values to Americans than they were to these wacky Islamist guys in Afghanistan. Yeah. So even a far right-wing guy would look at a situation like Afghanistan and be like, why the hell are we giving these guys weapons? Right. So what I'm saying is that what they're taking all those fringes, they're delegitimizing them. And it's not just, it is absolutely class. I agree with you. They dilute class, but they also dilute other things. They don't want, I think what they're really, it's the ultimate brand of authoritarianism. They don't want class loyalties. They don't want family loyalties. They don't want nationalist loyalties. They don't want ethnic loyalties or cultural loyalties. They just want loyalty to the state. And that's it.
Well, who's they and what do they want? So they are the ruling class. And in the West, the ruling class is the ownership class, the wealthy elites, the oligarchs. So the oligarchs, obviously, their number one priority above the family, above national interests, is maintaining their class interests and furthering their class interests, which manifests as a global empire and attaining global hegemony, controlling markets, controlling resources. So this is the driving force of Western imperialism. It's the class interest. It's the interests of the oligarch class of in the West, Western Europe, United States. So, of course, when you ignore that and you think that they're just a liberal democracy, you scratch your head. You don't know why they would weaponize the Taliban, right? That doesn't make any sense. They're not liberal. The Soviets allowed, women in school, and they were very progressive. Why would you oppose that? Well, because liberalism is a lie designed to conceal oligarchy and imperialism. That's it. And so, and somebody, Dust made the contribution that, liberals ain't left. And that's exactly true, because, liberals, they think they have allegiance to values and principles of freedom, of, individual rights. But in reality, these values are just cynically exploited and manipulated and used as justifications for the ruling class to further its ruling class interests, which is imperialism. Again, it's controlling.
I dispute your definition of liberalism with the big L when it comes to individual rights, because these people really don't want individual freedom or individual free speech either.
No, well, that's what I'm saying. It's an ideology, and the ideology is used to obscure the reality. And the ideology is used to justify a reality, and the reality is very different from the ideology. So these things they supposedly agree upon and want to promote supposedly are actually absolutely not important to them. And so for people like me and you to buy into this idea that we are a liberal democracy and that we really do support human rights and freedom, and that these are the justifications for coming up against these authoritarian things, like that's just a whole bunch of stupid. That's just a whole bunch of mindlessness, because the reality is totally different. The reality is these principles are just cynically exploited to justify rank dictatorship and authoritarianism of the ownership class, as they try and maintain their share of global hegemony, their control of resources, control of governments, and control of markets. I mean, that's what it's all about, and it always has been about, and that's what Marxism declares. And so it's just silly for me to see liberals defending and explaining and observing Marxism in action, and then still maintaining their liberalism and and talking about liberal. It's contradictory and confusing, and it really drives me crazy. But it's also stimulating.
Well, it's true. And I think Marxism, whether or not an individual person is a Marxist, there's a lot of feedback on your end. Can you get rid of it? Is there a way to get rid of it?
I can, I don't hear it, but I can mute.
Well, wait a minute. No, wait, unmute. I think it might be gone. I think it's gone. Yeah, it's gone. I don't know. You changed some. Well, it's gone now. But anyways, I think that's true. Is Marxism as an analytical framework, it's great. In fact, I would say the best college class I ever took was it was called Myth and Symbol. It was an elective class I took at college, and it took from an art perspective. It taught, and our professor was actually a hardcore Marxist. It was very funny. And actually, I argued with him a lot. And he's one of the very few people I would say I've met in my life who made me stop and think about what I believed, and influenced my view of the world. So I think taking that Marxist terminology and applying it to like something like art, explaining, okay, so here's this painting from this certain country from this certain time period. You can see, okay, how the hegemonic ideology of that country in that time played in that painting. So it was. I think you can, and I think I'm in absolute agreement with you that you can do that now. You can see how, from Marxist viewpoints, you can really explain everything that's happening in the world right now. That's absolutely true. I would, however, say though, what we have now is something that was different than when Marx was alive. And it's different than what was happening when you had the Russian Revolution. It's different than in the Cold War. And I would say it's because, and it explains why big business is gravitating now, I would say starting with Clinton and accelerating since then. Why we have to ask, why are these big businesses gravitating more to Democrats than they are to Republicans? And I've said it on the show before, because I think Republicans are boring. Because when you get a Republican as a president, or you get a Republican majority in Congress, what happens? To say, well, we'll have more tax cuts, we'll have some deregulation. They say the same bullshit they do every time. But I think if you're someone like Warren Buffett or Bill Gates, that's boring, because you already have a shit ton of money. So you have a party that's offering you more money, but you already have a shit ton of money. I think what we're seeing now is that Democrats are offering something more appetizing, that you can actually reshape humanity. And I think when you're one of the richest men in the world, you have a very big ego. And that's very appealing for a party to come to you and say, we can help, you can shape the world and humanity in your image. However you would like to see humanity change, you have the power to do it. I think that's a very appealing. And so it's more, yes, money is important. Gaining more, seizing more control is important. More capital is important. But I think we can't ignore the social aspects. They really get off on reshaping society the way they would like.
Well, I mean, and they're related, right? These two things are related. I mean, you can't control, resources and markets without controlling the perception of the people, without indoctrinating them in certain ways, without, keeping them in the dark and feeding them bullshit, the mushroom treatment. But certainly, yeah, there's all kinds of indoctrinations that go on, and it's different indoctrinations targeted at different people to make sure that the working class remains divided and incapable of understanding reality and coming together as a political force that can really threaten them. But
well, I mean, I want to bring up specifically nationalism because it's not just class. They've also overridden nationalism. So I mean, I want you to think of, like, let's bring up Germany, for example. I mean, Germany has been under Washington's boots, and it's gotten particularly bad in the past couple of years, right? When we literally blew up their pipeline, and they just did the Oliver Twist thing. Please, sir, can I have some more? That not even a whimper of protests. So here's my hypothetical for you. What if Germany became more nationalists? Not necessarily the AfD, because I'm not sure I trust them. But let's say Germany became more nationalist. Germans were just more nationalist and maybe even a little xenophobic. They're just like, you know what? We want a Germany that's best for Germans. Fuck these foreigners, screw them. And if they did that, they'd say, well, why do we have American bases in Germany? World War II has been over for 80 years. And they say, why are we in NATO? Why are we at odds with Russia, which has been up to this point our most important economic partner? They would start asking questions like that. And that would be very bad, of course, for the liberal establishment. They don't want Germans thinking more nationally, because obviously they would start acting, because if Germans acted out of German interests, they wouldn't be doing the things they are doing now. If France, because Macron is a liberal, Macron is a globalist. He repeatedly throws his own country under the bus in the interests of international banking interests. If France became more nationalist, that would be bad for the world order, as they like to call it, but it would be good for France. If Britain did that. Imagine if all these countries just became very, in the classical sense, nationalists. Just said, you know what, we're going to look after our own.
That would not be in the best interest of the empire. They would oppose that, and that's why they've worked to put governments in place that will sell their national interests out to the dictates of Washington, D.C. And I mean.
So I would define liberalism as it's an international, or not, I wouldn't even say international. I'm not sure I'd even say transnational, almost like post-national ideology. And that's why I say the Marxist framework is good, but it's not quite addressing the things that have happened in the last couple of decades, because I don't think there's any point in history where a ruling class just said, you know what, we don't even want nationalism anymore. Nationalism's against our interests. We want post-nationalism. I think that's a fairly new step. And I'm not sure.
I don't know. I mean, you can see this as, the oligarchy, the international oligarchy, because it is international, and that's what the class struggle is. So the class struggle plays out, manifests itself today in the struggle against Western imperialism. Am I really breaking up? Because my screen seems.
Yes, you are breaking up a little bit, but it's an interesting discussion. No, and someone mentioned Dugin. And the question is, so funny enough, I've met. I went to a party with not Dugin himself, but an employee of Dugin. He was an American, Joe Dugin. Almost the same last name, but he's an American from Florida who went to Russia and got a job. Yeah, and we went to a Christmas party at his house. But the main reason I don't agree, with Dugin, for one, I think he says what he thinks is the most sensational and gets him the most clicks. I also don't buy into the whole Eurasian idea. I think because Russia ideally, I mean, yes, Russia is to some extent pivoting east, but for Russia to get the maximum growth, they need to embrace both the West and the East. It's, I mean, improved trade with China, improved trade with East Asia. Yes, yes, yes. But Russia is a European people. It's a European country. It's a European culture. And I think that's why I think Russia is more of an enemy than with China, because your worst enemies are not the people who are very different from you. It's the people who are closest to you. The biggest enemies of European countries have always been other European countries. I mean, they've had wars with China. They've had wars in Africa. But the worst wars were always with each other. And that was even before the modern era. The 30 Years' War killed 8 million people. I mean, just imagine, in the 1600s, people fighting with swords and spears. I mean, killed 8 million people, like 20th century level casualties. So I think that's because China can be, there's a lot of saber rattling towards China, but I think a lot of it's rhetoric. I don't think China's even going to take the debate like Russia did. I think Chinese are harder to bait than Russians are. Though that said, we haven't done anything as extreme to China either. I mean, we didn't start killing Han's Chinese people. We didn't start shelling Chinese people, at least not recently, I should say. Obviously, we have shelled Chinese people in the past. Just not. I shouldn't say that, but you know what I mean. I think it's going to be. I mean, I don't think the war with China is going to go past an economic basis.
I mean, it's up to the United States. They've been clear about their red lines. And I mean, if they get Taiwan to declare independence, then there'll be war. And if the U.S. tries to intervene but I think, it's entirely up to the West. China and Russia both want to live in a world of peace through mutual prosperity and trade. And will the U.S. allow that or not? Right now, the U.S. says, hey, we're not going to allow that. We got to be the global hegemon. And it's this inexorable drive for global hegemony. That's kind of part and parcel of capitalism, but it's also, its fullest manifestation as imperialism. And, if you're a politician thinking this is ridiculous, this is suicidal, and you try and raise your hand in the U.S. Congress and say, hey, we can't do this, we got to change course, like, you're out of there, and this inexorable drive continues. It's an inevitable drive. And this is what Mearsheimer says about liberalism, is that it's an inexorable drive. It's a struggle for global supremacy, and it's inevitable. And so how is that liberal? Like, people need to just drop this liberalism. There's no such thing as liberalism. Is just a stupid bunch of bullshit designed to obfuscate and hide the reality of oligarchy and imperialism. But okay, no, I'm going to get the last word, Ian, unless you want to say something else.
I'll just say that there could be. I mean, if the USA wanted to, they could have a war with China right now.
Exactly.
They could. And the only thing they would need to do, there's only one thing they would need to do, is they would need to back out of the one China policy. Antony Blinken and Biden could make a speech saying, hey, we recognize. I mean, because what did Putin do before they moved troops into Donbass? He said, we recognize the independence of Luhansk and Donetsk. And that is what precipitated this war that's happening now. So if the USA wants to, I'm not saying they'll never do it. I'm just saying they haven't done it.
Right.
They could, but as of right now, the State Department and the U.S. federal government recognizes and respects or at least pays lip service to the one China policy. As long as they do that,
right,
I don't think there's going to be a war.
So until the U.S. makes this decision that they want war, they could tell the Philippines to, fire on, Chinese vessels in what the Philippines considers their ocean, or they could get their puppets in Taiwan to declare independence. And both of those would result in, the war if the U.S. wanted. I mean, so obviously right at this second, the U.S. doesn't want war because they could easily have it if they wanted it. The question is, I mean, but they also don't seem to want peace through mutual prosperity, right? That's another thing that the U.S. doesn't seem interested in. And of course not, because they're an empire and they're interested in global hegemony, and they're trying to figure out a way to maintain it and to attain it against, the growing Russia, China, Iran, Venezuela, etc. North Korea too. And so how they are able to, figure out a strategy of furthering their interests. Does that involve a future war with China? Does it involve, boots on the ground in Ukraine? Like these are all, does it involve boots on the ground against Iran? These are the questions that, the U.S. is going to dictate, because they're going to be the drivers of how it plays out, because Russia and China are not going to escalate. They want peace through mutual prosperity. We can have it right now, or we can have it after the empire fires its best shot at maintaining its hegemony and, just increases the rate at which it declines, which is what that would end up doing. Do I get the last word?
Sure, go for it.
No, that's it. I'm done.
That's it. All right, there you go. It's a good show, and
let me
see.
Thank all the viewers. And we didn't get we were too busy talking to get a lot of the comments, but we do appreciate the commentary and the views. We will reconvene on Friday, episode 112. We will see you then. Thank you very much.